One of the main difficulties of false colour infrared photography, that is photography where you're recording a mix of both visible and infrared light at the same time, is that most lenses do not focus infrared and visible light at the same point. This results in a chromatic aberration effect in images that cannot really be corrected. In visible light only, lateral CA is relatively easy to correct as the wavelengths of light are recorded in separate red, green and blue colour channels. But when mixing visible and infrared light together, the infrared does not have its own specific colour channel, but it's recorded in all three of the colour channels, and so if it does not focus at the same point as the red, green and blue light, there's no way to adjust it. Schnieder-Kreuznach make a line of lenses that are meant to be optimised for working from 400 nanometers to 1000 nanometers, called the Xenon-Emerald series. These lenses are not cheap and they're quite difficult to get hold of, as they're intended more as industrial lenses than for recreational photography. I recently managed to get hold of the 28mm Xenon-Emerald LD lens. They make an SD version of the lens designed for close-up work, and an LD version designed for longer focus distances. I already had the 50mm Xenon-Emerald, but I wanted a wider focal length, and that's why I got the 28mm version. Sadly though, the 28mm does not seem to actually be optimised for visible plus infrared work, as you'll see in the following tests. For this test I focused manually on the larger trees on the right hand side of the image at f2.8 on the Schnieder-Kreuznach lens, then I stopped down to f8. Autofocus was on the larger trees on the Canon RF lens which I'm comparing it against. The scene was lit by hazy sunshine, and the clouds got thicker for the images taken with the RF lens, so they weren't shot in as identical conditions as I would like, but it is still similar enough to show the differences between the two lenses. The tests were carried out on a full spectrum converted Canon R5. For the Schneider lens, 49mm filters were mounted in a drop-in filter adapter behind the lens. For the Canon, the same filters were used but screwed into the front of the lens via a 55 to 49mm step-down ring. The images were shot in RAW and converted in Adobe Camera RAW, making use of custom camera profiles to enable white balance on the ones that include infrared. Starting with the CB565 orange filter, this passes light with a wavelength greater than 565 nanometers. Looking at the mud tracks and the wheat leaves, we can see ghosting or double image, causing bad loss of detail in the Schnieder-Kreuznach image, while the RF image by comparison looks fine. The focus point looks similar on both images, though it's tricky to be sure on the Schnieder-Kreuznach image due to the poor image quality. Next test is with an 82mm screw-in orange filter, so we can see if the position of the filter behind the lens was having a negative effect on the previous test. We can see the focus on the Schnieder-Kreuznach lens was slightly closer in this image. If we look at the mud tracks closer to the camera, they're a mess with ghosting on the Schnieder-Kreuznach, but they look fine on the Canon RF lens. So we can see the filter position in front of or behind the lens makes no difference in terms of the bad CA on the Schneider. Next test is using an IR cut filter to compare visible light only, that is 400 to 700 nanometers. Both look fine, but the RF has more detail, as it's a sharper lens. If we turn off CA correction in the RAW conversion for the Emerald lens image, we see no difference. So clearly the CA we saw in the previous images is caused by infrared being focused at a different point to visible. Now testing with an IR pass filter to compare infrared light only. Both look pretty similar. The RF is slightly sharper. So the Schneider lens does not seem to have CA issues when shooting just Vis or just IR, only when you combine the two. Next test is with the Lee 101, a yellow filter that passes both visible and infrared, cutting light below 480 nanometers. Again, we can look at the mud tracks and see the same issues in the image taken with the Xenon-Emerald lens, while the Canon image looks fine. This test was with the red R1 filter that passes light from around 580 nanometers and longer. We see the same issues, though I would say the Schnieder-Kreuznach lens does not look quite as bad here, probably because there is less visible as a proportion of the total light and more infrared. Now testing with no filter for a full spectrum image, and again we see the same problem with the Schneider lens, while the Canon RF looks fine. I did a quick video test just in case there's any difference between stills and video. Zoomed in 10 times, we can clearly see pretty bad CA on the Schneider image, while the Canon lens looks fine. In ACR we can see that the RF lens profile only changes the perspective and vignetting. CA correction does correct a small amount of CA in the RF image, but the CA is even worse on the Schnieder-Kreuznach lens when we turn CA correction off. In these tests I've been comparing the Xenon-Emerald to the Canon RF 28mm lens, which to be clear is better in terms of focusing infrared and visible light at the same point than most of my other 28mm lenses. So I was comparing it against one of my best lenses for false colour infrared work. But a lens that is designed for use for 400 to 1000 nanometers should give better results than my RF lens, not much worse. The results from the Schneider are much like my other non-specialist lenses that can be used at 28mm. The Schneider is also much larger and heavier than any of my other 28mm primes. It requires extra bits and pieces to be able to use it on a consumer grade camera, and there's no autofocus or even auto aperture control. It's much more expensive than the Canon RF 28. And even if you were to use it only for visible light photography, or only infrared and not a mix of the two, the sharpness of the lens is not as good as the RF 28mm lens either. The only place where the Emerald beats the Canon is in its lack of an infrared hotspot, but I'll take having to correct the Canon images for a hotspot over the uncorrectable CA of the Schneider lens anytime.